Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are. With Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is... yes.
Archaeology is the search for fact, not truth. If it's truth you're interested in, Dr. Tyree's philosophy class is right down the hall.
I know why you took the Mirage vow. You thought this life would give you the peace you seek, but your past still haunts you.
The Jedi must have the deepest commitment, the most serious mind. Yes, failure most of all. The greatest teacher failure is.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi. I am your host, Dan Zehr, delighted to talk Star Wars with you. Since May 2013, I've been committed to creating a positive, family-friendly, spoiler-free place for our Star Wars community. Imagine walking into your favorite coffee shop and joining a lively discussion about Star Wars films, Disney Plus live action, animation, books, comics, collectibles, or Star Wars experiences at the Disney theme parks. I want to bring that sense of community to this podcast, my website, special events, live video experiences, email newsletter, and more. Join our Star Wars community at coffeewithkenobi.com and be part of something special. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mousefan Travel. Check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefan-travel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote, and let them know Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zehr sent you. On today's show, we're going to look at the psychology, spirituality, and mythology of Star Wars The Acolyte with two very special guests. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi. Hello, friends. It is time. We're going to look at once more The Acolyte. I shouldn't say once more. I'm quite sure in the history of Coffee with Kenobi that The Acolyte will be a repeat conversation, but we just finished season one, a fascinating, polarizing, important season of Star Wars that I think ventures into a lot of areas that are worth a lot of introspection, discussion, and analysis. So what better place to do it than right here on Coffee with Kenobi? And the show is going to be about the psychology, the spirituality, and the mythology of Star Wars. So I have 2.5 experts here. I'm the half to talk about this. First, of course, the spiritual side of the Acolyte, and there's plenty to talk about. We have our good friend, Father Jimmy, back on the show. Father Jimmy, great to have you. And honestly, who could be better to discuss the spirituality of Star Wars than you?
Great to be back, and I'm very, very excited for this. Not just to talk about the spirituality of Star Wars, but to dig into the Acolyte with two great guys.
Well, thank you so much. Speaking of great guys, we have David Motters on, who everyone knows in the world of Star Wars and fandom. Of course, he's the co-host of the fabulous podcast Star Wars Reactions. And if you've been listening recently, especially their breakdowns, he has brought his psychology corner to another level of brilliance. And so he's a clinical psychologist. Like you're an actual doctor, David. And I think that's so important to bring out because it adds a level of ethos to your already well-established pathos and knowledge and insight. So thank you so much for being on and being our expert on psychology.
Oh, man, thanks for having me on. I've always enjoyed coming on with you, and I was looking forward to recording with Father Jimmy. And when you presented this idea, yeah, it's perfect because, like you said, Aaron and I, my co-host, we've been really covering the psychology of this series. So, yeah, I'm ready to go.
Let's do it. And I am presenting myself humbly as the expert in story, just because I love stories. I've been teaching English and literature for now. This will be my 19th year, working on my second master's degree in this field. And I spent a lifetime embarrassingly obsessing over fiction and stories and the art and craft of stories and how they come to life. So I feel like this is going to be really, really exciting. I'm looking forward to it. And before we even jump into the ologies of it, when you add an ology to something, it just means the study of, right? So spirituality, study of the spiritual side of things. Psychology, the study of the human condition, right? What our brain chemistry, what makes us tick, why do we do the things we do? And the mythology, myth, as I've said many times, myth is a Greek word from mythos, which simply means story. Mythology doesn't mean a story told about Zeus and lightning bolts or Thor with a hammer. Mythology means story, okay? All these things are a part of the Acolyte. And I think we all come to it from different places as far as our interest in what worked for us in the Acolyte. Father Jimmy, let's start with you. Give the Acolyte, the entire series, a letter grade and just kind of defend your answer and how you feel about the series. So we all so everyone listening knows kind of where we're coming from with this series.
Yeah, I'd say for me, I kept bouncing back and forth for my letter grade, figuring you were going to ask it. I thought you would ask it at the end, but
no. I think it'll be good to establish now because then you can see if we have any biases, which,
Sure.
Of course we do. We're human.
I think I put it, I kept bouncing back and forth between B minus, C plus.
Okay.
I think it was a very bold story. It told a story in a very unique way. Wasn't afraid to it didn't pull any punches, but some of the storytelling elements fell flat for me. I didn't quite connect with the characters as much as I have in many of the other series. And so I gave it that kind of torn sense between the B minus and the A and the C plus was because I like bold stories. I like the creativity. But again, it didn't quite land for me.
Okay, fair enough. David, what about you?
Yeah, I would go with a B for me. And
Okay.
the reasoning behind that is because an A for me would be if there was hope, if there was a hero to cheer for, kind of the classic stuff that I remember growing up with in 77, 80, and 83. I do understand what Leslie Hudson was trying to do. You and James Burns talked about it last week on the main show about how it is called the Acolyte. They put it right out there, but it's tough to watch. It's tough to watch. But the reason why I give it a B is because of, well, like you mentioned, Dan, all of the topics that it's generated. Like you said, it's polarizing. People are talking about what they like, what they don't like. And for me, it's been a smorgasbord to create psychology corners. Aaron jokingly said, it's not a psychology, it was a psychology episode. Almost our last two were almost entirely psychology episodes. And so for me, when you get that, that boost to discuss all these issues, the ones that I've covered the last couple episodes, it's just been an incredible joy for me. But it would be an A if it had kind of the classical stuff that I think all three of us are used to seeing.
Right. Okay, so I was hoping we were all in different spots, and I think we are. I probably graded the lowest of all of you. Well, I'm much closer to Father Jimmy. I gave it a C minus. If not for the strength of how they wrapped up the story that they were trying to tell, this would have easily been a D plus for me. But I feel like they wrapped up what they needed to wrap up. There were a lot of narrative threads that were not addressed. Not as bad as anything with Basil, but we'll get to that probably. Sorry, Greg McLaughlin. I know you're a big Basil guy. But I think Star Wars is a story. It's about hope. And does every single episode, every single page, every single frame need to be about hope? No, because you still have to tell a story. You have to build, you have to arc into your story, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's certain key points. I don't need it to be a traditional story, but I do want a story that makes me think, that adds to the overall mythology and structure of what they're trying to do. I completely applaud Leslie Headland for her boldness, and Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy for their boldness in telling an unconventional story with unconventional characters that still reach a significant amount of people. And I celebrate that. If something you respond to that, I think that's terrific. But the key thing, and this is why it's perfect for both of you on here, is that I believe that we need heroes. I think people say we need heroes now more than ever. I'm sure that someone has said that every day since Adam and Eve chewed on that apple. We always need heroes. Heroes are relatable because they show us what we can aspire to be like. Can we, fight the Nemean lion like Hercules, or can we defeat Loki? Can we return the ring to Mordor? Right? Can we do all these heroic things? No, but can we overcome obstacles? Can we overcome the doubt and adversity that we bring upon ourselves, or that people bombard us with? Yeah. Can we believe in things that we can't see, knowing that there is a purpose and a path for us? Yes, and David, we'll start with you on this, and Father Jimmy, jump in anytime. You talked about moral relativism and determinism, and unless I missed it, the one key, because determinism means it's fate, right? It's preordained. It's going to happen regardless of what you do or don't do. And then you've got free will, which says, it's your choice. The classic thing I did in British literature is when we read the first Harry Potter book. It's the only book I teach seniors the last couple of weeks of school, because getting seniors in high school to read anything right before they get out of high school is quite daunting. But there's the part when they put the Sorting Hat on him, and the Sorting Hat has this great conversation with Harry about, not Slytherin, eh? You could be great, it's all there. Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor, and everybody celebrates. And so I make every person answer, it was this determinism, was there free will? Did he choose to be in Gryffindor, or was it meant to be, and that was just kind of window dressing? And whatever my students say, I would say the opposite. If they say, well, it's free will, I think, oh, you think there's no plan for life? Oh, great, that's really depressing. And then I wouldn't let them talk. And if they say it's determinism, like, oh, you're just a puppet. And that would frustrate them too. And I did it by design because I wanted them to see that there are more ways to look at something, which leads me to say what you really probably believe is soft determinism, which is the concept that, yes, there is a scheme, there is a grand plan, there is a design for you, but you ultimately get to choose how you get there and if you're going to get there, right? There's something bigger than you. How do you guys think the Acolyte played into this?
Well, if you want me to jump in, Father Jimmy, and please help me from the spiritual aspect. But on our show, I talked about determinism versus free will. I also talked about moral relativism, like you said, Dan.
And you quoted C.S. Lewis in a perfect quote that I was going to talk about. Yeah.
Versus, say, ultimate truth. And so when it comes to this question, I've told this story many times. I had two of my professors. They were on my master's thesis team. They were on my doctoral dissertation team. Dr. Brian Lakey was very much determinism. Dr. Douglas Barnett is like, no, you have free will, Dave. And so I know over the years, I think I spent a decade thinking we had free will. Then I had probably 10 years where I thought, well, it's determinism. And I've gone back and forth. But I think, like you said, Dan, ultimately, probably the soft determinism, that there is free will, but there's an ultimate plan. I gave some examples the other night about potential examples of determinism. For example, I gave a statistic about the number of men in prison. 85% of men in prison don't have fathers. That's not 100%, but that is a staggering number in psychological research. You don't tend to get numbers like that. No. And so if you don't have a father, and you're a male, white, black, Hispanic, I don't care what color your skin is, there's almost a deterministic quality that you're going to be in prison. Are you going to, I've said to a number of men, if you don't have a dad and you're not dead or in prison, it's just get on your knees and praise God that you're not there.
Does that number have to do with like up to the age of 18? Do you have any idea what because we are promised we're all relating this to the Acolyte, but we're setting up how we're defining these things.
Well, right. And for me, it was really generated by the episode choice, right? Which was episode 7. So that really got me thinking about this issue. But I would have to go back and look at the research, but these were main numbers about people that when they asked these individuals, did you have dads? No. And so, like I said, 85% didn't.
Shocking.
Now, right, it's a horrible number.
But as an educator, that doesn't surprise me, honestly.
No, No, it's hard enough when you have two parents who love you, care for each other, and parent you. And so, again, from a deterministic quality, I'm going to go with two parents who love each other, have a relationship with God. They love you and your siblings, and encourage you to respect your teachers and get an education and do well in our communities. Now, a flip side to this, again, I love what you did, Dan, where you jump to either side. And I like doing that. I'll do it to myself, right? If you flip the other side, if we didn't, you know, uh, think that free will was important, then, or environment, right? We think of determinism as being more genetic and who you're born to. Well, free will is like, why would we have teachers? You've been a teacher. My dad was a teacher for 32 years. If education wasn't important, it's already determined he or she's going to be a good student or not. You don't have to
Right.
do school, or even me as a therapist. Why do that work? Because everything's determined. You're a puppet. There's no point to intervene from a teacher's perspective or me from a clinical psychologist perspective. So again, the beauty of the Acolyte is it really brings up these issues. And Dan, you've said this many times over the years, and I did listen to every one of your episodes with you and James talking, which were excellent, is
Thank you.
Wonderful job. Is you've said over the years that story, mythology, helps us to talk about difficult issues that we would most likely not talk about if that story wasn't there.
That's right.
Yeah. And so that's why for me, when I was listening to you and James, I think I texted it to you. You're nailing it. You're so much better on story. You've got your doctorate in that, man. There's truly, you're there, and your knowledge of mythology. That's why for me on our podcast, I thought Dan's got it on CWK. I'm not going to repeat what Dan's saying. I want to jump over to these deeper issues that people don't typically want to talk about because it flusters them, or they get frustrated with it, or don't know what to say about it. And so I thought, well, let me make the internal external and talk about that particular issue of determinism versus free will.
And may I say, you did it in a way that was not didactic. You weren't telling people what to think. You were fully explaining these are the different ways. And I think that's important. I think that's really important. Father Jimmy, this is a lot, but you are a pro on this as well. How would you weigh in from the spiritual side of this?
Yeah, I think this is a great topic. This is a great kind of meditation, and I guess coming more from the theological side, the spiritual side, and I can only really speak from a Catholic theological side. We do see this tension between free will and God's grace. God's grace is something that allows us to do pretty much anything, and so many theologians over time have kind of wrestled with that. Where is this? Where's this balance? Because we know we have free will. And that free will is what allows us to truly love, to truly choose to love is by our free will. And so this sort of tension between what is God's grace, what's free will, am I forced to do this? There's that sense of predestination, like we're talking about determinism. And I'd say from a Catholic perspective, the determinism isn't so much that we have this fixed fate as you see in the Greek tragedies, but it's more we're designed for a particular purpose. We're predestined to have this purpose to be in union with God. And so in a sense that is our fate because of that. And I do find this an interesting kind of meditation as well, thinking about Star Wars and the Force. I don't know if it's ever really come across if the Force has a will. I think we often more see characters that can control the Force, but there's also a receiving from the Force. Like the vision.
You're describing the light versus the dark, whereas the dark wants to control the Force and make it work for them, and the light works with the Force. And because Yoda does mention the will of the Force, but as far as seeing it, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and so we know that from the theological side, God has a will. He has a will that he is enacting, and us ascending our wills to his is sort of how we fall in line with that. And again, how personal the will of the Force is, it's hard to tell. That is sort of where one of these distinctions comes into play.
And not to mention the fact that, as I say, I've been saying a lot recently, the Force is fake, but mythology is real, right? And these concepts and these ideas and these big picture things that are so integral to who we are as human beings, those are real things. So when you see them come to life in the Acolyte, I think that's just really ripe for discussion. So, Father Jimmy, why don't we start with you on this? Where do you see examples of this, whether it's in Choice or any of the 8 episodes, where you think we should unpack it a little bit?
Are you talking about this tension between the determinism and the free will?
Yeah, or anything that is related to kind of what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think it comes up the most with the Jedi, right? The Jedi, especially in the era of the High Republic, are the mantra is for light and life. Light has historically and mythologically been a source of inspiration, of warmth, of texture, of safety, right? You light a torch in the Cro-Magnon days so you can see, so these things don't eat you, right? Or you don't fall into darkness because there's no power. So, right, so light has always been a source of safety. Jesus says, I am the light of the world, right? The ultimate man and symbol of goodness. I am the light of the world, the light of the Force, for light and life. That we're presented with a story where the person who's the strongest in the light of the Force is on in a post-credit sequence for like a second, and that's Yoda, and we only see him from the back. Leslie Headland has confirmed that is Darth Plagueis. She's also said I had to have Yoda in there because he is the ultimate balance to counter Darth Plagueis, and I wanted to have that balance there. Great, effective, mysterious. Those are all good storytelling companions. But for me, the challenge with this, and hopefully either of you can shed some light, on this, is how do you view a story which is about a group of individuals who are connected to the living Force and are supposed to be ambassadors of light and goodness in the galaxy, yet they're all gray, and they're not officially gray Jedi because, again, there is no such thing in the canonical Star Wars, but they are self-absorbed, or so inwardly focused, and I'm very much including Vernestra in this as well. That they don't prescribe to this notion of being a Jedi, yet they wear the robes. Literally, it's like a uniform because they all wear matching robes on that. So I think there's a lot there. I'm throwing a lot at you.
Yeah, I think one thing that comes up, especially when we're talking about the light and life, this light. Whereas to me, we see the contrast that with the Jedi and their propensity for lying, for hiding the truth through all of it, and often when we reveal the truth, it's considered bringing something to the light.
Good point.
And so I think we kept seeing how these lies never actually led to truly what they set out to accomplish. And so in a sense, there's that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in a way that the lying didn't actually help. And I tried to do a quick rewatch after, Dan, you invited me on, and I was surprised at how often in the first few episodes there was little quick lines about truth and lies and revealing things and deception. And they were small and they were there. And it turns out that was kind of setting us up for the whole rest of the season. I kind of missed them the first go round, but they were there. And I think the lies that the Jedi were perpetuating is what really brought their downfall in this time.
And it's also sort of a foreshadowing to the prequels. So David, adding to that, why do we lie? If we're not sociopaths, why do we lie?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is we want to save face. We're social beings. We want to look good for others. We really do. We want to stay out of trouble. There's another one, right? We don't want consequences. And to piggyback off what Father Jimmy said and what you were asking, and you said, Dan, jump into some examples. I do think about Choice, and And I wanted to say this because you asked James this question, I think in the last episode, not for choice, but for the last one, the Acolyte, is this show presenting lying in a relatively good way?
All right, is a permissible alternative. Yes.
Right. And when you ask that, that's exactly what this story, what this series has got me talking about. That's what brings up the other issue, not just free will versus determinism, but is there right and wrong? Is there ultimate truth? Or is there moral relativism? Right. And so when you were asking that question, that was just buzzing through my head. And one of the thoughts I had was that I think you and James kind of fell on the side of no, I don't believe so, because it shows the consequences, how bad things turn out, right? But maybe I know, right? I know
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Well, right? Yeah, what ultimately happens with this? But like I was thinking about Vernestra lying, to May and lying to the council and or that Senate committee, right? And I'm just thinking to myself, yeah, don't lie. Go through this, deal with the consequences, and clean it out. It's trying to cover up an open wound with just a Band-Aid, but you need to clean everything out. And they're not doing that. And that's why, again, I came up with wanting to talk about moral relativism versus ultimate truth and how, yeah, there is right and wrong. A lot of these shows try to do the gray stuff, like you said, Dan. They try to muddy the waters and stuff. They get you talking, but that's why, again, from a very didactic teaching point of view, I made an argument that there's ultimate truth and that people really need to look out if there's moral relativism, because you might not like that real soon.
Right. Oh, absolutely. This is so good. Father Jimmy, as you were studying to become a Catholic priest, I know that you have to take a lot of philosophy courses, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's keeping it with Lucasfilm, the beginning of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. When Indiana Jones is teaching his classes, he makes a point of talking about fact being different than truth. How would you respond to that notion of fact being different than truth? Because I find that to be clever wordplay. But I think from a philosophical standpoint, I guess I can see a difference. I always sort of wondered about that. I wonder if you could shed some light on that. I love that I keep asking you questions and the word light keeps coming up. That's so perfect.
Yes, I do like that line, Indy's line about fact and truth being different, and I agree. There is an objective truth. There is objective truth out there that we all ascribe to. Well, I wouldn't say we all ascribe to, but it's there, and I think everyone realizes this or lives that out, whether or not they could actually verbalize that. But this difference between fact and truth, that I'd say facts, you can have the paintings on the wall, like a cave painting. That's a fact. We have a painting of the caveman hunting the dinosaur, but the truth behind how that actually went, we don't know. And so sometimes I think that's where you can get a little bit of this difference between fact and truth. I think facts probably lay a little bit more in the concrete world. Truth would be a little bit more metaphysical.
Yeah.
Right. And yet they could almost be synonyms, couldn't they?
Yes, I think many times they are. I think if you're trying to make that distinction, or at least the semantic distinction that Indiana Jones is making, then that's where I would kind of fall. That you can have facts, and different people can interpret those facts, even if the truth isn't known at the moment.
Right. Because a fact is 2 + 2 = 4. That's a fact. It's inarguable. And I think when we say that truth isn't the same as a fact, I think that's a way of saying moral relativism, isn't it? We're like, what is your truth? Well, I think that's the wrong term. I really think it's the wrong term. And you mentioned something that I wanted to point out again. Whether you are Catholic or Christian or whatever your particular proclivity is towards your faith or your spirituality or your lack thereof, as C.S. Lewis points out, and I don't have the exact terminology and exact verbiage in front of me, but he says something akin to, look, there is a truth, and there's an absolute truth. You won't find any tribe, even the most uncivilized tribe in the world, who thinks it's okay to take someone else's stuff or to kill someone. Any of those things, like those things are sort of inherent in us. Now, why is that? Right? So if we tie that into Star Wars, because I know that we have to circle it back to that, the sliding scale that is truth ultimately comes down to people thinking they're making good decisions, or, as you said, David, trying to hide things because they don't want to be held accountable, or they don't want to be responsible, or they want to get into trouble. I think Master Soul, and let's talk about it through the lens of Master Soul, a character I desperately wanted to love more than I did, but they made him so flawed, which flawed characters are great. I think the greatest fictional character ever made is Hamlet, and he's as flawed as they come. So that's a compelling thing. But why does he choose that Osha is so important? Why does he want to have her as a Padawan? And then how can he possibly defend the choices that he makes without even ever saying, I made a mistake in killing your mother, right? I think that's an interesting part. Does it make him a complicated character? Maybe.
Well, maybe to jump in, Dan,
Please.
one of the things I was thinking about is, and I don't know about you and Father Jimmy, you guys tell me your thoughts on this, but I watched Saving Private Ryan once in the theaters when it came out. Yes, I'm old enough for
I
that.
do.
Right? The other one, when I was in grad school, working on these degrees that all three of us have worked so hard to earn, I saw Schindler's List. And both are incredibly difficult to watch. We're meant to be this way. Again, I go back to what you and James were talking about, just this discomfort that you felt, Dan, watching the whole series. And you're like, I think I was supposed to feel this way. And I agree with you. And that's why I had not watched Saving Private Ryan or Schindler's List until just 2 years ago, before my son was going to take a trip to Europe. And part of that trip was to go to Auschwitz and Krakow,
Wow.
Poland. Okay. So I sat down and watched it with him. Now, I could make a strong argument that probably every American needs to watch Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan every year, but it's hard to watch. How about this one? Passion of the Christ. That is incredibly difficult to watch. Same thing here. What I feel like it's doing is almost like, hey, Exhibit A, watch this series, don't make these decisions. To wrap back around to what you said, Dan, right? I was trying to remember before we jumped on, all three of us, there was a movie, I don't know how many years back, where Richard Gere plays a psychologist. And his client has, I think, Kim Basinger as a sister. He ends up having a relationship with her. And again, as psychologists, in our code of ethics, you never have a relationship with a client, either them or family members. And not just when they're your client, but in perpetuity, because there's a power differential. So I bring up that movie because I think about this and what you were just saying, Dan, about these decisions. Like, why does he have this almost an attachment to her? And we know that from the Jedi rules, don't do that and get yourself in trouble, just like Padme and Anakin, right? You're putting yourself in a bad position where she's not going to do senatorial duties, or it's going to affect her. And of course, it affected him as a Jedi. So here we see Soul having this almost unhealthy attachment to her, and then the bad decisions that follow. And so I see this series, like the difficulty that I have watching Saving Private Ryan or Schindler's List, those feelings. But I think probably once a year, I would say to Star Wars fans, maybe watch this and don't do this, right? Just like that movie, I'd say Prince of Tides as well. You see, a younger Barbara Streisand and Nick Nolte. And I believe she's a therapist. She ends up having an affair with him. Again, things not to do, right? And so that's where I think this series could be really helpful to people. Look and see these decisions, these choices, free will choices that Soul makes, and look what happens. Just tragedy.
Father Jimmy?
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of this, portray the lies and the decisions in a positive light, which, I think it would have been an F for me if the Acolyte turned around and said, lying's good, But yeah, I think it is interesting to look at Soul and look at the decisions he made. I kind of took his initial desire to have Osha as his Padawan as sort of that prompting from the Force, as that sense of that was what prompted him.
Which he mentions.
And so I took that on face value, and then from there, he's kind of trying to accomplish the will of the Force. And he doesn't always, I think, go about that the right way. I don't necessarily blame him too much, because after everything goes down and they're back on the ship, he wants to come clean. Like he wants to come clean at that moment, and he feels kind of trapped in the midst of all of these other lies. And who knows how close he got during the time when Osha was his Padawan, to telling her the truth, and how that would have gone if he told her the truth sooner.
And how interesting, I agree with you. I think that he had really powerful intentions and he wanted to come clean. This is almost a message of make sure you have the right mentor, because Indara, who he respects, as well as Vernestra, ultimately neither of them have his back because they lie to protect. I'm still not convinced why Indara does that. Maybe it's because she, inadvertently or not, ends up killing all that coven of witches with the way she does that pushback, which has yet to be fully fleshed out, and maybe it won't be, and that's fine. For Soul, it's understandable why he's concerned about the mother, because when May is doing that test, and I talked about this on Facebook Live a couple of weeks ago, when she's doing that test, instead of saying we must sacrifice for the greater good, she says to Master Soul and Indara, we must be sacrificed. Well, that's very different. That's very, very, very different. The Old Testament, especially the earlier Old Testament, is full of this kind of a concept of sacrificing of human beings. And if that's what Soul was thinking, it sure seemed that way. Of course, he thought she was in danger. Not to mention the disappearance and going into black smoke. So it's understandable. It's really more about Indara and Vernestra and what is their motivation, purely to protect themselves, which is quite cowardly. Quite cowardly and very upsetting. And that, I think, is a problem. Again, as you mentioned earlier, David, and James mentioned last week, it's called The Acolyte. It's from the perspective of the antagonist, who becomes the protagonist in a series about them. For her, it really is and I don't think the story earned enough of a reason for us to show why Osha was mad, unless it's purely, I'm mad that you killed my mom and you lied to me. Those are good reasons. Those are very good reasons to be angry and upset. But enough that you'll completely turn your life away when you spent the majority of it being pro-Jedi. All of a sudden, like, maybe this is the way to go. And maybe it's because, as Palpatine would want him to think, even though that's an anachronism in this story, the Jedi corrupt, they follow their dogmatic views, and you can't trust them. Well, the Jedi in this story live up to that infamous promise, unfortunately. But David, yes, please tell us about...
Well, as you and Father Jimmy were talking, one of the things that I thought about is, again, here's another example. Like you said, how does this story present lying? Is it okay? Is it another option? And the same thing here, you've got two individuals that, the story tells us are, to a large extent, screwed over by, at least their view, by the Jedi Order. And this is where, for me, the big, deep issue is, and I can hear this pastor in my head when I was doing some prison ministry many years ago. We went in with a group of guys and spent time called Kairos, time with God. And so when you go into prison and you spend time with men locked up, this pastor said this: if you're not prayed up and you're not read up, you need to shut up. And I loved that he said that, right?
Me too.
Right? Because be consistent, Dan, with what you're talking about, if you're the Jedi and you are not, training under Yoda, following and doing the training you need to do mentally and physically, and then you go out to these outer rim planets and you start interacting with people, and you have a disaster like this occur, you didn't cross your T's and dot your I's and stuff like that. And so it always, this is another example. Watch what they do. Don't do this. Be ready when you're going to go to talk to people, because, like, look, there's only two athletes that I want them to talk about their faith, particularly from a Christian perspective, right? Now, I have my Jewish brothers and sisters and Muslim brothers and sisters that I've worked with and been clients and stuff, but at least, and they can talk about who they would like, but it's David Robinson and Tim Tebow. They're it. Where they talk about their faith, they've talked about it, and what? They haven't had on Friday night after the game, they got the DUI. Oh, hey, Dave Motters, look at your Christian athletes. They talk a big game, and then they look like fools, just like the Jedi do in this. And so, so for the most part, I'm like, no, athletes, please don't talk about your faith, especially if you're going to do those things. And that's why with the Jedi, I'm like, people are looking at you. Father Jimmy knows this. I've said it forever. If you're a pastor, priest, or a reverend, look out. Everyone's looking at you to see what you do, how you talk, how you act. So have yourself in order. And that these guys didn't. And again, that's why I think it's a big learning thing. People could really learn from this and see, look, when you don't have your mind right or your body right and you're interacting with people and you start making bad decisions, look what happens. You've got two people, they're holding hands and they're moving in the wrong direction, because we know under Plagueis, Palpatine ends up coming and being his apprentice. These two don't survive, I guess, to perhaps, that's a good chance they're not. If you're around Plagueis, you're done. And so here's where, when an institution does the wrong thing, and the three of us have seen institutions, schools, churches, synagogues, mosques, government, we've seen them. When they do wrong, people look at it, they rebel, and they go the other way. And don't be surprised when they do, but it breaks my heart to see something like this, because if I think what's going to happen to Osha and Chimere, it's a tragedy for them as well.
And we're very quick historically to tear down an institution, and less willing to do the self-examination that is required to make us better. You blame the Jedi as a whole, as opposed to a couple of selfish, albeit sometimes well-meaning desires or ideas or motivations. And that, to me, is why I respect what the Acolyte tried to do, because it showed very honest, very flawed, very broken people that I can't relate to, because I don't know a lot of people like that in my life. Thank goodness. So that, I think, is a win. I guess a different conversation is, and maybe it's this conversation, do we go to Star Wars for that kind of a thing? Some people didn't like the new Indiana Jones, and I'm still not quite sure what I feel about it, honestly. But they wanted to see swashbuckling and adventure and wisecracks and whips and a septuagenarian Harrison Ford just being awesome. And it showed more of a realistic side, albeit with time travel. What an interesting sentence. Whereas this, while I think these characters are not fully fleshed out, even in fiction, I think some of what they do and why they do the things they do makes unusual sense through the lens of who they are. But as you said, Father Jimmy, knowing the purpose is really important, that motivation, because some of the things that are happening, you're not just going to do unless it serves you from a selfish point of view. Which leads me to another massive problem that I was concerned with, and that was the fact that Vernestra was more than willing to let everyone think that this man, Sol, who she appeared to really respect and perhaps love, She was more than willing to let it be known that he committed suicide because he just couldn't deal with the demons that he was fighting. And that, I still say, and I don't even think, I used to think it was somewhat controversial. I don't think it's controversial at all. I think he's more tragic than Anakin, because at least Anakin got to be redeemed and save people. This guy, for the rest of his life, unless Vernestra tells the truth, no one will know. And that's hard for me psychologically and spiritually, story-wise. All of that is difficult for me. Now, Father Jimmy, you'll know this better than me, but last year I did the Catechism in a Year podcast with Father Mike Schmitz. And when they talked about suicide, he said, there is a place in the Catechism that addresses, sometimes there's an assumption. And actually, I'm not even going to put this in a podcast because it'll upset too many people. But I just want to finish this little conversation, just the two of you right now. It says in the Catechism that if the mental health is a part of it, then that does not assume that you're just going to instantly go to hell, because there are other alternative factors. But I don't know.
Yeah, from the Catholic moral perspective, a grave sin that cuts you off from God, a mortal sin, it needs to have three components. Grave matter, it needs to be serious. You need to freely choose it, and you need to know it's a sin. So often when it comes to suicide, there's a lot of mental health issues involved. And with that, someone who is deep in depression or other mental health issues, it's probably not a fully free choice. They weren't making it in their right mind. So I think that's...
it's so important to address that. I don't know if I should put that in the show or not, because this isn't really... But I think that's important. I don't know how you can relate that to soul, but I think it takes away from the respect that he could have had, because there is such a negative stigma, and understandably so, on suicide.
Well, I agree with you. Today I was talking to people who are depressed all day, and when you talk to them, there's tons of inaccuracies in their thoughts. Aaron Beck, the famous psychiatrist who developed cognitive behavioral therapy there at the University of Pennsylvania, he constantly talked about, he called it stinking thinking. And I have a list of 10 different cognitive errors that you see in people who are depressed. Selective attention to the negative, right? 20 positive things happen that day. One negative thing happens, and they're telling Father Jimmy or you, Dan, or me, they focus on the one negative, and the three of us are like, wait a minute, you had... What about these 20 things? Oh, no, Father Jimmy, no, Dan, Dave. No, I'm focused on the one negative. So there's lots of cognitive inaccuracies, and I'm backing up what Father Jimmy just said.
I love that you clarified that for us, Father Jimmy, too, by the way, because I think that's so important. And that's never talked about. It's never talked about.
Right. Yeah, that's another thing that this series brings up. For when you said, Dan, that what Vernestra does, and again, I've read all the High Republic stuff, that, and I've really enjoyed it, all the novels and comics and everything. This is not the Vernestra that we know, and so that's a little rough to see. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't make a decision with characters and say, hey, we want him or her to go through this arc. I get that, but her doing that. But the previous thing that I think is even really shows, I think, the lack of clarity of thought and soul is when he sits there and tells Osha, it's okay for you to kill me. In essence, that scene, that's troubling. So it's not okay for her to do this, not only for what it's going to do to you, but also what it's going to do to her. She's already bled a lightsaber. And then that if she kills, this is going to push her completely over to the dark side, and that Chimera guy's standing right there, not even knowing that Plagueis is around. So there's clearly at least my point of view, that clearly a lack of clear, logical thought for Soul at that point. He's just so beaten down and so tragic. So that ending there makes it even more so. And then, like you said, Dan, it's even compounded more with what Vernestra does to her friend.
Now, if they're going to say that because she is one half of a full conscious that is split into two people, which is a very, interesting, unique. I'm not sure if I fully buy it, but we don't have the whole story, so we don't know how it's going to be fully fleshed out. But if they're going to say that she can't fully, because her frontal lobe is not all there because she's split into two people and she can't fully think it through, That would be interesting. Otherwise, she's just evil, right? And then who was that character from the beginning? Did Osha and May switch personalities suddenly? Did they have both of that in there? I don't know. I mean, Father Jimmy, you both of you. I mean, I guess I do in a very different way, but you both deal with people and divergent personalities all the time. It's a pretty complicated thing, isn't it?
Yeah. You want to go, Father Jimmy?
Sure. Yeah, I do think it's complicated, and there's that extra level of complication thrown in there with Osha and May being the same person, but not the same person. And so I think sometimes that's a little different. I kind of took it a little bit more as that maybe when they were split, they didn't necessarily get like two different halves. We see a lot of that throughout it. We see sort of the kind of complements between the two of them. But to me, it seemed more as if like perhaps they got different attributes and then they fully grew into full cognitive individuals. And then, yeah, she kind of faces this moment where she just lets all of her emotion and passions take over, which was an interesting thing kind of relating to these two halves when May burns the notebook and then kind of throws it down. To me, that was a moment of a kid who's just been through some trauma, accidentally through her emotions, light something on fire, and then all of a sudden that snaps her out of it and she realizes what she's done. Because, she was 8, just experienced great loss and doesn't know how to handle her emotions. Then you have Osha hearing about this man that she's trusted, who's been kind of her primary hope and savior through all of this, finds out that he's actually been the cause of her grief, the cause of what caused her not to continue in the Jedi Order, and she lets the emotions and passions overcome. Honestly, the first time I watched it, I kind of missed Soul giving the okay for Osha to kill him. I didn't quite think that's what he was getting at. I was just didn't want to believe that. I just sort of, I'm not quite sure what he meant in that moment. I think it was more of Osha allowing all of these emotions to overcome her, sort of letting that take charge instead of kind of maturely dealing with emotions.
I also missed it the first time, and then I saw it a second time, and I was aware of it, and I quickly put it out of my brain because I thought, surely this can't be happening. Surely this man can't be so fractured and broken. Because by all accounts, he appeared to be a very, very respected Jedi master and teacher. David, I want to share, if you want to weigh in on that, go ahead, but I want to share an email that a listener sent that I think is a good way to close this out.
Okay.
Do you want to comment on what Father Jimmy said? Or?
Oh, no, let's go to the email.
Okay, so this is from Tori Latempt, and she says, Dan, hello. First, I want to say I've enjoyed your show for several years. I wanted to write in to comment on your review of The Acolyte. I really enjoy listening to you and James Burns discuss the show. I really like the points you both brought up. I'm writing because I listened to the show while running, and at one point found myself talking out loud in response to you two. It was in regard to your point that there is no message in the show, or at worst, the show is implying lying is okay. That is what I disagree with. I took the show to be showing the beginning of the fall of the Jedi. We see them arrogant, certain in their righteousness, attached to their organization and order over all else, self-justifying their behavior. All this leads to their eventual fall. I think the show is showing how good things like the Jedi Order can fall into disrepair, and law and lose credibility. If they start thinking they are beyond reproach, their motives are always righteous and the dreaded ends justify the means. I agree with you and James that narrative was uneven and they should have spent more time on the script. Overall, I would have given it a C. But I firmly believe that this is a cautionary tale and not a celebration of evil. Because, as James was alluding to, if Ernestra, Endora, or Sol had acted differently and not lied, things may have been very different and we would have not had such a complicated or a complacent Jedi Order that enabled the rise of Palpatine. This is a classic human story of arrogance and folly. This show is just the beginning of that fall. So I definitely think that it has a warning and a message in my mind. It is simply the road to hell paved with good intentions, which is proven true over and over again in fiction and real life. Regards, and that's Tony from Arkansas. Tony, it's like the force is with you, and you listen to our discussion before we even had it, because I feel like you helped make this make sense. What do you think, guys? Father Jimmy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think they're in a similar vein. One of the kind of underlying storylines that I wish had been hit harder was this tension between the Jedi struggling to follow the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. And I think we see in Soul quite a bit this sense of him really understanding things, kind of reading between the lines. We saw in Yord was very much wanting to follow all of the laws, all the letter of the law. And so that tension that exists there, and I see that a little bit more. I kind of live in that tension as well. You know, there's lots of kind of things that we follow in the Catholic Church, and then when someone comes to me with a problem that doesn't fit neatly into any of these categories, where do I go from there? How do I kind of stay in bounds? And so I feel like we see that tension a good bit throughout this story. And it's not just on the Jedi. I feel like we see this with the witches as well. There is that sort of back and forth between May and Osha, where May wants to do everything that the Coven is doing. She wants to follow these things, and many members of the Coven want those same types of rule following. Even when it comes to the rule following, to forcing children to do a witch ceremony. I don't quite know what you want to call it.
Right.
And Osha desires
the ascension.
more. The ascension, yeah. Osha desires more. She desires this life with the Jedi. And there's that tension that we see there as well.
That's beautifully said. David, anything you would like to add to this really nice email? Thank you again, by the way, Tony, for sending that in. And if any of you want to email your thoughts on this or any topic, Star Wars, feel free to do so. Feedback at coffeewithkenobi.com.
Well, I agree with you, Dan. The Force truly was in a deterministic way getting Tony to write that email to us. You know, no, I think that's that cautionary tale. That's what I was saying. Like, you watch this, and I would encourage people to look and see, and even if you don't think you're a Jedi or a witch or whatever, look at the bad decisions made, learn from it, and don't do it. You know. That's, I think, a big part of it. And we know, part of when I've been watching this series, Dan, I visualize not just these episodes, but I just kind of in my mind's eye fast forward up to episode 1, Phantom Menace, episode 2, and then 3. And the way that 3 ends, it's tough. It's tough to see that, and to see Palpatine come to power. Vader is created and go from there. So this is the start of that, but it is a cautionary tale, and I hope that I was conveying that as well. Like I was mentioning with these other movies that have shown, again, whatever profession you are, a teacher, a priest, like Father Jimmy or myself as a psychologist, we can all make, well, here we go, bad decisions, bad choices, and it makes the people that we represent look really bad. So that's, again, I'd go back to that pastor. If you're not prayed up and you're not read up, you need to shut up. And there's a lot of people who talk and say things, and then they look at Father Jimmy or you or me, Dan, and go, well, why are Christians acting this way? And it's like, I'm like, boy, please, sometimes they're not helping, right? Yeah, my Jewish clients always say, oi, oi, and oi. Yeah, they always say, don't get to the third oi, it's bad. So, but yeah, so yes, I really am glad that Tony sent that in, and I do think it's a cautionary tale, and that's why I said I think it's probably good to watch, periodically and see, okay, let's not do these things.
I think between Tony's email and you, Dr. David Motters, you, Father Jimmy, I think I'm at peace now with what Leslie Hedman was trying to do. And I probably did a lot more mental gymnastics than was necessary, but that's kind of the line that my that my little brain got into when I was first born. So that's kind of always been that way. Because I think the analysis, the rhetoric, the conversation is so integral and important. And I'm very, very, very grateful for the two of you for teaching us and for sharing these windows into the spirituality, psychology of this incredible story, which is the Star Wars saga. Is there anything else, gentlemen, that you'd like to talk about in regards to the Acolyte as we wrap things up?
Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, I could go on for hours and hours, but I'll just I'll leave it at that. It was so great to get on and talk about the spirituality, and then Dan, from your perspective, your knowledge of mythology. That's why I love listening to your show and learning from you, because that's your wheelhouse, and so I listen to you to learn from that. But I think all three of us want to be very didactic and want to teach and help people, and so I'm thankful that you asked us to come on, and hopefully people who listen to this, it'll help them. And like I always say, if there's something I've said that you like, take it. If you don't like it and say, oh, that Dave Motters, he's clueless, well, toss it. That's healthy.
I've never tossed anything you've said. Father Jimmy also, just really, really great. Always, anytime I get a chance to talk with either of you, I'm going to take the advantage to do it. But I appreciate you sharing time with us and in providing your insights as well. And is there anything from the Acolyte that we haven't addressed you'd like to talk about before we wrap up?
I think I'm in the same boat as David, that it's both yes and no. I think we covered a good chunk of this, but I always am willing and able to keep talking about Star Wars. It's one of the things that I really like about Star Wars is how it creates these conversations, creates things that keep going. And one thing I realized through watching The Acolyte was, even though, as I mentioned, there were some plot points and story techniques that didn't quite work for me, I was always immediately texting my friends as soon as the episode was over to talk about it. So it still made me interested in what was coming next, made me want to talk about it, made me want to have these conversations. And so from that end, I thoroughly enjoyed that part of it. But for now, I think I'm satisfied with this great in-depth conversation.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
I love it. Well, there's always going to be more to come on Coffee with Kenobi, and I truly can't thank you both enough for lending your time, talents, and expertise. David, please let us know where people can reach out to you and where they can find Star Wars Reactions.
Absolutely. If you want to find me, the best place is Twitter X. It's at David_Modders, Modders. I was going to throw out there my co-host. I love Aaron. He was with me, and we were obviously part of the Coffee with Kenobi network back in the day. And Aaron is a great co-host. He is at TA Harris 121079. If you, I've been saying this on our show. If you go to any of our socials, just look up Star Wars Reactions. You'll find them. Aaron monitors all that. I know we're swreactions@gmail.com. If you want to send an email like Tony did to you, Dan, people can hit us up there. I'm on Instagram as well. It's just my name. I haven't been posting a whole lot, not as much as Dan. Dan's got all kinds of good stuff on his Instagram, but yeah, Twitter X is the best place to do it, and more than happy to talk about these issues that Dan and Father Jimmy and I have talked about. It's fun, it's enjoyable, and I hope people really get from the three of us, it is okay to talk about these deeper issues.
It's important. I think it helps us to heal and to help others as well. And Father Jimmy, where can people reach out to you if they want to ask you about Star Wars or anything that tickles their fancy?
Well, since the last time you had me on, Dan, I went off social media, so that's no longer an option. I didn't have much of a presence anyway, and even that small presence was taking up too much of my time.
I get it.
Yeah. So I guess the best way is if someone listens to the podcast and is interested, I'll let them contact you, Dan, and then they can get to me. And especially if you're in the DC area, I'd love to get together and talk Star Wars, talk about the faith, talk about anything and everything. I'm always down to get together.
I love it. And yes, definitely reach out to me and I will be happy to send the message along to Father Jimmy. Absolutely. Thank you again, gentlemen. Thank you to Father Jimmy and David Motters for joining me to talk about this fascinating topic, the spirituality, mythology, and psychology of the Acolyte. Certainly am looking forward to more conversations like this. Want to make you think, want to make you laugh, and truly appreciate you joining us. The website is coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, videos, and more. Don't forget the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Go to coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefan-travel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote. Remember that next summer, June 16th to the 20th, we are going on the Disney. You may remember last year we went on the Halcyon, a big group of Coffee with Kenobi listeners and lovers of Star Wars and just adventures with the Disney theme parks. Join me for this incredible one-of-a-kind experience. And now we're going to do it again on the Disney Wish. They have the Hyperspace Lounge, several Star Wars events and experiences for children and people who just love Star Wars. It's a great community. I hope you can travel and join me on the Disney Wish next summer. Find out more at coffeewithkenobi.com/Disney Wish, and you can get your no-cost, no-obligation quote there. Even though CWK Live is officially over, the CWK Cafe Facebook group is a great place to go for Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler and drama-free place. And speaking of that, thank you again to everyone who joined me live on CWK Live. Earlier this week, it was the last official live show. And yes, obviously, as you can tell because you're listening right now, Coffee with Kenobi, the podcast, is not going anywhere. It's just the live show ended its weekly run after a little over 4 years. But go to the cafe, CWK Cafe, coffeewithkenobi.com/community to continue those conversations. And of course, you can email me anytime. Coffee with Kenobi is possible because of members of the CWK Alliance. Thanks to you, the podcast, event coverage, and so much more comes to life. Find out how you can help this show for as little as $1 a month and support me by joining the CWK Alliance, and you will receive access to CWK Pour-Over, an exclusive weekly audio and video podcast not heard anywhere else. Plus 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital. Join the CWK Alliance at coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Alliance. Email me at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com. Connect with me on X at Mr. Zehr, on Instagram and Threads at danzercwk, and on LinkedIn. Coffee with Kenobi is on social media, X, Instagram, Threads, Pinterest, TikTok. Give the show a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, or subscribe to Coffee with Kenobi's YouTube channel. Please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps more people find Coffee with Kenobi and our wonderful community. If you like the Coffee with Kenobi logo, go to coffeewithkenobi.com/shop for hoodies, t-shirts, coffee mugs, laptop covers, and a lot of really cool things. And finally, if you need a speaker for an upcoming event, you can book me to attend your school, conference, business, or organization. I'm happy to talk with your group about how to tap into your strengths, bring out your very best, discuss mythology, or customize a presentation to fill your needs. Thank you as always for joining me for a virtual cup of coffee. I appreciate your time and look forward to the next opportunity to talk Star Wars with you. I'm Dan Zehr, reminding you that this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.